general, Yakutia is a Klondike of some kind in terms of creepypasta. The vast majority of the republic is a solid forest, isolated and untouched by man. The area of Yakutia is as large as the whole of India or 6 countries of France. The journey from one settlement to another, you must traverse this isolated forest for 6 days. In this unique setting, there are a plethora of scary stories, and in local folklore, creepypastas hold a position of utmost intrigue. Story 1. Bottle-shaped people. From stories, it happened in Soviet times in a small village in broad daylight. A man named Semyon was a local collective farmer and was returning to the village on a summer evening from haying. The dirt road ran along a wasteland. It was sunny and hot. Semyon was walking along in a good mood, humming something under his breath, and at some point he noticed 3 men walking towards him on the road. The one in the center is taller, the others are shorter than him. Semyon then perceived them as an adult and his 2 children. He wonders who they could be. He concludes that it's a neighbor with his sons from his village and calmly walks on. But when they came closer, he noticed those walking on the sides were not children. They were only a little shorter than the center one. Then Semyon noticed that the outlines of those walking were extraordinary. They wore the same gray clothes. The figures descended to the ground, widening downwards. That is, the shape of the walkers resembled something like a bottle. He couldn't see their legs and didn't understand how they could move. Semyon was not immediately frightened. At first, he just kept walking on automatic. Then suddenly, he recognized their big black eyes on faces as white as paper and was horrified. Immediately, he remembered that according to Yakut beliefs, when encountering any evil spirits, one must never run away, otherwise they would be chased and might kill him on the spot. 20 paces ahead, a narrow path led off from the road, and he aimed to reach the fork before the bottle people and missed them. But fear so gripped him that he forced himself forward. He was afraid to look at the faces of these creatures, but as soon as he lowered his gaze, it seemed as if they were about to pounce on him, and his eyes automatically returned to the going people. As he remembered, all 3 of them were almost identical in appearance, white, without a single bloodline, with large black eyes that looked only forward and heavy, deformed figures that grew wider at the bottom. They differed only in height. Finally, Semyon reached the fork and turned onto the path. At that moment, only a dozen meters were between him and the creatures. Trying not to run, he walked along the route, watching the coming out of the corner of his eye. To his relief, they passed by without even looking in his direction. When they had moved a decent distance away from him, Semyon ran to his house. He turned around a couple of times and noticed dark silhouettes of bottle people in the distance on the road. As it turned out later, he wasn't the only one who saw them that day. Several people in the village and the neighborhood also noticed the trio by chance and were frightened to death. They all agreed that these people had no interest in their village and were passing through, going somewhere on their business. Story 2. Headless Man. According to legend, this story occurred in one of the central districts of Yakutia. In the late 1970s, a boy lived in a small village near the district center. At the time, he was 10 and was friends with a neighbor boy, Vasya. One morning, he woke up and as usual went to his house to play, but his mother said that Vasya was sick, so he wouldn't play. The boy went home, and the following day his mother told him that Vasya had died. As he was told later, the boy suddenly had a terrible pain in his head. Vasya's parents spent the whole day trying to self-medicate, and only in the evening sent for a doctor to the district center. There was only one doctor in the village, and that was a woman who could only deal with colds. By that time, the child was already in a severe condition, and the local doctor forbade to transport him anywhere in such a state. So, Vasya's father drove his Zhiguli into a town to quickly bring the doctor in his car without waiting for an ambulance in the district center. They arrived late at night, both as white as chalk. It turned out that when they were driving back through the forest, about 5 kilometers from our village, they noticed in the rearview mirror, in the moonlight, how a headless man was chasing them 100 meters away from Zhiguli. Both Vasya's father and the doctor saw him. From such a distance, and even at night, they couldn't see any special details, only they both claimed he was abnormally tall, even without his head. His height reached 2.5 meters. Vasya's father hit the gas, and the creepy pursuer soon fell behind. Having calmed down, the doctor gave Vasya some injections and an IV, ordered them to build a stretcher, and carefully took him to the district center. On the way, the boy died. It was said that halfway to the town, before he died, he briefly regained consciousness. He couldn't speak, but kept raising his right hand and pointing backwards. Remembering the recent vision, the adults gazed warily into the night road behind the car, but saw nothing. A few minutes later, the boy died. Story 3. In the Rain. This happened to my uncle from Yakutia. He lives in a rural area and works as a teacher. Once in autumn, he and a friend decided to go duck hunting. The place they chose was far away, about 50 kilometers from the village. After teaching his classes, he walked to the agreed lake in the afternoon. The autumn sky was quickly getting darker and colder. The friend was still not there. As it later turned out, he was urgently called to work in a neighboring village and had to leave without informing his uncle. In the excitement of the hunt, the uncle didn't notice that it was already evening and a light rain began to drizzle. Uncle decided to go to an old abandoned hut on the forest edge. He decided to spend the night there and go back in the morning. He lit a fire in the stove, ate, then got into his sleeping bag and started to prepare for sleep, when suddenly, out of the blue, fear began to enter his consciousness. Lying in the sack, my uncle didn't notice how he fell into a dream. When he woke, water droplets fell on his face, and his sleeping bag was damp. When he opened his eyes, he saw that he was not inside the hut, but outside in the rain. He was freezing and ran inside the hut, realizing that he was being joked at by some devil. He drank half a bottle of vodka for courage and went to bed, having propped up the flimsy door of the hut with a lock, and again he fell into a deep sleep. He woke up again, drenched in rain in the street. He cursed and stubbornly went inside the building, lit the fire in the stove again, drank the rest of the vodka, took out a knife, and got into a wet sleeping bag. He decided to wait for the evil one, pretending to be asleep. About an hour later, the almost 2-meter tall figure of a woman dressed in ancient Yakut clothing, emerged from a dark corner in the glow of smoldering embers. Her hair was loose, and her facial features were obscured, but in the cold glow one could see inhuman eyes of a yellow color. The uncle lay with half-closed eyes, neither alive nor dead. The woman approached him, took hold of his sleeping bag, and dragged him outside. Uncle lay there pretending to be asleep. When the devil disappeared, he gathered everything and went home despite the slash and the night. A few years later, my uncle revisited the lake and looked into the hut. The walls on the inside showed the marks of rifle shots. Some hunter had been attacked by this foul thing, and the hunter decided not to be ceremonious, finished his uncle's story. Story 4. The Bad Apartment in Yakutsk. They say there are a lot of ghosts in our city of Yakutsk. Periodically, they tell scary stories at the table about evil spirits which don't let people live peacefully. I didn't believe in ghosts categorically, and over such stories I only laughed. They made no impression on me, but one day my impenetrable materialism couldn't withstand the test of life and leaked. It was like this. I urgently needed to rent an apartment, and so a one-bedroom apartment almost in the city's center turned up. It was rented by a young family, which for some reason preferred to live not there but with their parents, which is strange. That's where I would be wary. Besides, I knew the neighborhood was built on an old cemetery, but carefree and happy, I moved in. All I had was a cot, a table, and a couple of chairs. I settled in, hung the curtains, and cleaned the place. One strange thing turned out. The apartment's windows faced south, meaning it should be boiling hot in summer. But even on the hottest day, it was as cold as a crypt. The first night, I woke from a terrible sniffing under the cot. I thought, that's how audible it is. Neighbors behind the wall are breathing. Only in the morning did I realize there were no neighbors behind this wall, but there was a street because the flat was on a corner, and the nearest neighbors are across the room, kitchen and bathroom, so their sniffing couldn't be heard. I was surprised, but that's all. A few days later, I was even more surprised. I heard bare feet stomping at night, as if a child was running. I woke up. The water ran in the bathroom, and wet baby footprints appeared on the floor. They appeared in a chain and then disappeared. To say I was shocked is an understatement. I couldn't think of any other explanation than that it was a dream, so I turned away and fell asleep. A natural creepiness would set in at night when the nights got darker towards the end of summer. For some unexplainable reason, I was scared to the point of shivering. I started sleeping with the light on. Soon, the light broke. I called the electricians. They fixed the wiring. The next day, it broke again. I called the electricians again. Soon, they were coming to my house 5 times a week. I'm not exaggerating. I shouted at them, "What kind of masters are you?" I said, "You can't fix it once and for all. The wiring breaks every time in a different place," they justified themselves. And then, an acquaintance of mine stayed with me for a week. After the first night, she said, I should sprinkle the flat with holy water. But all night, the taps were opening and closing by themselves, and the child was running around the flat. It's scary, and how do you live here alone? And there was a light bulb hanging from the ceiling, naked, no chandeliers or lampshades. And just as my friend was about to speak, it fell. The cord it was hanging broke in the middle, as if someone had pulled it as hard as they could and severed it. We immediately went to church, took holy water, and sprinkled the whole flat, every wall, every corner. And you know what? It worked. I could breathe easier. For 3 days, there was silence. The lights didn't break, the water didn't open, and nobody sniffed or stomped at night. And then, everything started with a new vigor, and the rest of holy water in a cleanly washed jar became moldy. When my friend left, staying in a flat at night became impossible, especially in the kitchen. Going in there in the dark was creepy for no apparent reason. In general, it ended up like this. I left my bag in the kitchen in the evening. At night, I didn't go there to get it. In the morning, I found the child's palm print without one finger on it. The print couldn't be washed off with any detergent. I didn't spend the night there again. I quickly rented a room, moved my things, and gave the keys to the owners. They didn't even ask me why I had run away from their apartment so quickly. Story 5. A Calf Eater. One brutal family had cattle dying out. Either the cows couldn't get pregnant or gave birth to dead calves. If an average calf was born, it was feeble and died within a week after birth. In such cases, there are two possible causes. A. Ordinary bad luck. The spirits of cattle do not patronize them because of some past or present sins. Or B. They have a calf eater in their stable. This small evil spirit feeds on the cattle spirits so they cannot survive. Of course, there is a problem, but not of such a large scale. Mainly since the creepypasta events didn't occur in ancient times, and somewhere in the 60s, 70s of the 20th century. Cattle die, it's said, but what can you do? But one day, a woman came home in the afternoon, and they had a child of about 5 years old who stayed at home during the day while the parents worked, and found her child in the stable playing with some wood. Before entering the stable, she heard the child talking to someone inside. Two voices were distinguished. She interrogated her son and found out that for some time he had a friend, a shaggy and attractive boy dressed in clothes made of skins. The new friend always lived inside the stable, coming out of a dark corner. They often played together, and the shaggy boy encouraged the child to smuggle food from his stable. He insisted that the boy didn't tell anyone about him, especially his parents, otherwise he would no longer play with the child. The woman was very much frightened and told her husband in the evening. The family council decided it could only be a calf eater, but what could be done about it? The head of the family consulted a shaman in the village, and one morning gave his son a sharp steel yakut knife. "Hide it in your trousers," he said. "Pretend everything is normal. When this new acquaintance approaches you again, stab him in the stomach with all your might." The stern yakut kid agreed without any questions. In the morning, the child returned to the stable with a large portion of delicious food. He sat in the center of the stable and began playing alone. This time, the friend didn't appear for a long time, and when he finally looked out of his corner, he was weary. Soon, the boy in skins came to him and began to eat the flat bread. The kid took a moment to look away, pulled the knife out from under his trouser leg, and stabbed him in the stomach with a sharp blade. The stable was filled with a shrill shriek, and the child lost consciousness. When he came to his senses, he saw that he was lying alone in the stable, with an uneaten flatbread lying next to him, the knife still in his hand, and the blade was stained with very dark and thick, almost black blood. There was no sign of the friend. The friend didn't appear in the skins again. and the cattle finally began to give birth as usual.